Welcome to this conversation about one of the most fascinating questions I receive from people around the world. How do Jewish families consistently build and maintain wealth across generations, often starting from absolutely nothing? Today, I am going to walk you through the exact framework that has allowed families in our community to transform their financial lives. And I believe these principles are universal enough that they will work for you regardless of your background or current circumstances. Before we begin, I want to invite you to join the Torah Millionaire Business School. It is a complete 14-module program where we dive deep into the Torah's perspective on money, work, and stewardship. You can find the link in the comments and in the description below. Now, let me start with something that might surprise you. When people ask me about Jewish wealth building, they often assume it is about secret investment strategies or insider knowledge about the stock market. But the truth is far more profound and far more practical than that. The foundation of generational wealth in Jewish families is not about luck, and it is not about having connections to wealthy people. It is about a completely different philosophy of what wealth actually means and how you acquire it. I want to tell you about a man named Cornelius who came to me about 15 years ago. He had arrived in this country with nothing but the clothes on his back and a deep desire to build something meaningful. Cornelius was from Eastern Europe, and he had grown up in a family that had lost everything during difficult times. When he arrived here, he had no capital, no business experience, and no wealthy relatives to help him. Yet today, Cornelius runs multiple successful enterprises and has built a net worth that most people only dream about. When I asked him what the turning point was in his journey, he did not talk about a lucky break or a brilliant investment. Instead, he talked about a shift in how he thought about education and knowledge. This brings me to the first and most critical step in building wealth from nothing: prioritizing wisdom and education above all else. In the Jewish tradition, we have a concept that knowledge is the only asset that cannot be stolen from you, cannot be destroyed by external circumstances, and actually grows the more you use it. This is why in our communities, we have always invested in education before we invested in anything else, even when families were poor. This is not just about formal schooling, although that matters. This is about intentional learning in the areas that directly impact your ability to earn, manage, and grow money. When Cornelius first started working, he was earning minimum wage at a factory, but every single week he would spend money on books about business, economics, and finance. His friends thought he was crazy. They were saving every penny for a down payment on a house. And here was Cornelius spending his limited resources on books. But Cornelius understood something fundamental. The knowledge he gained from those books would generate far more money than the money he was spending on them. Within 5 years, the knowledge he had accumulated allowed him to start his own business. Within 10 years, that business was generating more revenue than the entire factory where he had started. The principle here is that when you have nothing, your only real asset is your ability to learn and your ability to think. Therefore, the most logical investment you can make is in expanding that capacity. This is not about getting a degree, although that can be valuable. This is about becoming obsessed with understanding the principles that govern financial success in your chosen field. It is about reading, listening to podcasts, attending seminars, finding mentors, and asking questions relentlessly. In Jewish tradition, we have always believed that the person who asks questions is the one who grows. The person who pretends to know everything stops learning and therefore stops growing. Now, let me move to the second critical step, and this one is particularly powerful because it creates a system where the entire community benefits: the Gemak system. Gemak is a Hebrew word that stands for a community lending fund. The way it works is that people in the community contribute money to a common pool, and then members of that community can borrow from this pool at zero interest. The borrower simply returns the money according to a mutually agreed upon schedule, and then that money goes back into the pool for someone else to use. On the surface, this might seem like a charitable act, and it is. But what most people do not understand is that the Gemak system is actually one of the most powerful wealth-building tools ever created. Let me explain why. Imagine you need $5,000 to start a small business. You go to a traditional bank and they tell you that they will lend you $5,000, but you will pay back $7,000 over the course of 5 years because of the interest. Now imagine instead that you go to a Gemak and they lend you $5,000 with zero interest. You pay back exactly $5,000, nothing more. I had a friend named Vivian who was a teacher. She was earning a modest salary and had very little saved, but she belonged to a Gemak in her community. One day, she had an opportunity to buy a small rental property, but she needed $15,000 for a down payment. She did not have that money and she could not qualify for a traditional loan. So she went to her Gemak and borrowed the $15,000 interest-free. Over the next few years, she paid back the Gemak while the property appreciated in value and generated rental income. That rental property became the foundation of her wealth. Today, Vivian owns multiple properties and has built a substantial portfolio, but none of it would have been possible without the Gemak system. Now, here is the deeper principle at work. When you borrow money from a bank and pay interest, a significant portion of your repayment is going to the bank's profit. That money is leaving your community and going to shareholders who may not even live in your community. But when you borrow from a Gemak, all of the money you repay goes back into the pool to help someone else in your community. This creates a multiplier effect. The same dollars circulate through the community multiple times, helping different people start businesses, buy homes, and invest in their futures. Over time, this creates a community-wide increase in wealth and opportunity. The lesson here is not just about accessing cheap capital, although that is valuable. The lesson is about understanding that wealth is not a zero-sum game where one person's gain is another person's loss. Wealth can be created through cooperation and mutual support. When you help someone else access capital to build their business or buy their home, you are not losing anything. You are actually participating in the creation of new wealth that benefits everyone. This is why in Jewish communities, participation in a Gemak is considered not just a financial strategy, but a moral obligation. The third step in building wealth from nothing is mastering the discipline of Shabbat and what it teaches us about delayed gratification and living below our means. Now, I know that many people who are not familiar with Jewish tradition might think that Shabbat is simply a day of rest. And while that is true, it is so much more than that. Shabbat is actually a weekly practice in delayed gratification and intentional living that trains your mind and your discipline in profound ways. Here is what happens on Shabbat. For 25 hours, from Friday evening to Saturday evening, observant Jews do not engage in commerce, do not use money, do not work, and do not conduct any business transactions. This might sound restrictive, but what it actually does is create a boundary between the part of your life that is driven by consumption and accumulation and the part of your life that is driven by meaning, family, and spirituality. Every single week, you practice stepping away from the pursuit of more stuff, more money, and more status. I had a client named Reginald who came from a family that had been in business for 3 generations. His grandfather had built a successful company, his father had expanded it, but Reginald was struggling to maintain the family wealth. He was constantly spending money on luxury items, upgrading his lifestyle, and comparing himself to other wealthy people. His financial advisor told him that his problem was not that he was not earning enough. His problem was that his lifestyle had expanded to consume all of his income, and then some. Reginald was actually spending more than he was making, which meant he was slowly going into debt despite earning a substantial income. When I suggested that Reginald observe Shabbat, he was skeptical, but he decided to try it. What he discovered was profound. By spending 1 day a week without money, without the ability to shop or consume, he began to realize how much of his spending was driven by habit and impulse, rather than by genuine need or desire. He started to notice that many of the things he was buying did not actually bring him joy. They were just ways of filling time or managing anxiety. By the end of the first year of observing Shabbat, Reginald had naturally reduced his spending by more than 40%, not because he was depriving himself, but because he had become more conscious about what he was actually purchasing. The principle here is that living below your means is not about deprivation. It is about clarity. It is about understanding the difference between what you want and what you actually need. It is about recognizing that much of our consumption is driven by external pressures and internal insecurities rather than by genuine value. When you practice stepping away from the consumption economy 1 day a week, you gain the perspective to make better choices during the other 6 days. You start to see through the marketing and the social pressure that tells you that you need to spend money to be happy or successful. Now, let me introduce you to the 4th critical step, which is the ancient diversification formula that appears throughout Jewish wisdom literature and rabbinic teachings. This formula has 3 components: land, business, and liquid reserves. In modern terms, we would call this real estate, entrepreneurship, and cash or liquid investments. The reason this formula has endured for thousands of years is that it balances security with growth, and it protects you against different types of economic disruption. Let me explain each component. Land represents stability and long-term appreciation. Throughout history, land has been the most reliable store of value. It cannot be destroyed by inflation in the way that cash can. It produces income through rental or agricultural use. It is tangible, and it is something that you can actually see and touch. In modern times, real estate has the same characteristics. A piece of real estate that you own will still be there in 50 years, and it will likely be worth significantly more than it is today. Business represents the growth component of the formula. A business has the potential to generate income far beyond what you could earn through wages alone. A business can scale. A business can create value that did not exist before. A business allows you to leverage your time and your skills to generate returns that are proportional to the value you create rather than simply proportional to the hours you work. This is why every successful wealth builder eventually moves from being an employee to being a business owner or an investor in businesses. Liquid reserves represent safety and flexibility. These are cash, savings accounts, bonds, stocks, and other investments that you can quickly convert to cash if you need them. Liquid reserves allow you to take advantage of opportunities when they appear. If you have all of your money tied up in real estate and business, and an amazing opportunity comes along, you will not have the capital to take advantage of it. Additionally, liquid reserves provide a buffer against emergencies and unexpected expenses. They allow you to weather difficult times without having to sell your long-term assets at a loss. I worked with a community fund manager named Bartholomew who had observed this principle for decades. He had seen families build wealth by diversifying across all three categories, and he had also seen families lose everything by being too concentrated in one area. He told me about a man who had made a fortune in real estate during a boom time. The man owned dozens of properties, but he had very little liquid reserves and no business interests outside of real estate. When the real estate market crashed, the man lost nearly everything because he had no other income sources and no liquid capital to help him through the downturn. Bartholomew also told me about another family that had built a successful business but had not invested in real estate or maintained liquid reserves. When the business encountered difficulties, the family had no safety net. They had to sell the business at a terrible price just to generate cash to pay their bills. If they had been following the three-part diversification formula, they would have had other assets generating income while the business recovered. The lesson is clear. Do not put all of your eggs in one basket. Build your wealth across multiple categories. Own real estate for stability. Build or invest in a business for growth. And maintain liquid reserves for flexibility and safety. This is not about being conservative or timid. This is about being smart and resilient. This is about building wealth in a way that can withstand different economic conditions and different market cycles. Now, we come to the fifth and perhaps most important step, which is transmitting values and principles to the next generation rather than simply transmitting money. This is where most wealthy families fail. Statistics show that approximately 70% of family wealth is lost by the second generation, and 90% is lost by the third generation. This is not because the money is stolen or because of bad luck. It is because the values and the principles that created the wealth in the first place were not transmitted to the next generation. I have seen this pattern repeatedly. A first-generation entrepreneur builds a business through hard work, discipline, and sacrifice. The business succeeds, and the family becomes wealthy. The second generation grows up with wealth and comfort. They did not experience the struggle that their parent experienced. They did not learn the discipline and the values that created the wealth. So when they inherit the money, they do not have the internal framework to manage it wisely. They make poor decisions. They spend recklessly, and within a few years, the wealth is gone. This is why in Jewish tradition we place such emphasis on transmitting wisdom and values to the next generation. We tell stories, we ask questions, we involve our children in our work and our decision-making. We let them see both our successes and our failures. We teach them that money is a tool for creating value and helping others, not an end in itself. I had a conversation with a wealthy man who was deeply concerned about this issue. He had built a successful business and accumulated significant wealth, but he was worried about his children. He wanted to give them financial security, but he did not want to give them so much money that they lost their motivation and their sense of purpose. I asked him a simple question. What do you want your children to remember about you? Do you want them to remember the money you had, or do you want them to remember the principles you lived by? That question changed his entire approach. Instead of simply planning to leave his children a large inheritance, he started intentionally teaching them about the principles that had created the wealth. He involved them in his business. He taught them about the importance of education and continuous learning. He taught them about the Gemach system and the importance of community. He taught them about Shabbat and the discipline of living below their means. He taught them about diversification and risk management. By the time his children were adults, they did not just have money. They had the internal framework to create and maintain wealth themselves. This brings us to the thread that ties all of these steps together, which is the principle of communal responsibility. In Jewish tradition, wealth is never viewed as purely individual. It is always viewed in the context of community and obligation. When you build wealth, you are not just building it for yourself. You are building it so that you can contribute to your community, support those who are struggling, and create opportunities for others. This is not a burden or an obligation that is imposed from the outside. This is an internal value that flows naturally from the understanding that all wealth is ultimately a blessing, and blessings are meant to be shared. When you operate from this perspective, something remarkable happens. You stop seeing other people's success as a threat to your own success. You start seeing it as an opportunity. You start looking for ways to help others build wealth because you understand that when others prosper, the entire community prospers. Cornelius, the immigrant entrepreneur I mentioned earlier, understood this principle deeply. As his business grew and he accumulated wealth, he did not retreat into a gated community or surround himself only with other wealthy people. Instead, he became deeply involved in helping other immigrants start their businesses. He mentored people. He provided capital to promising entrepreneurs. He helped create a gemach in his community. He did all of this not because he was forced to, but because he understood that his own success was built on the generosity and support of others, and he wanted to pay that forward. When you operate from this perspective, something interesting happens to your relationship with money. It stops being something that you are clinging to out of fear. It becomes something that flows through you. You are comfortable spending money on education because, the knowledge will generate more money. You are comfortable lending money through a gemach because you know that you are participating in the creation of community wealth. You are comfortable maintaining discipline in your spending because you know that the money you are not spending on yourself is available to help others. You are comfortable diversifying your investments because you know that you are building a foundation that will support your family and your community for generations. The practical application of all of this is that you can start building wealth from nothing right now, regardless of your current circumstances. Start by investing in your own education. Read books, find mentors, learn the principles that govern financial success in your field. Then, look for ways to participate in your community's wealth building. If there is a gemach, join it. If there is not one, consider starting one. Practice the discipline of Shabbat or some equivalent practice that helps you step back from consumption and gain perspective. Start diversifying your investments across real estate, business, and liquid reserves, even if you start small. And most importantly, start thinking about what values and principles you want to transmit to the next generation. I want to leave you with this final thought. Wealth is not a mystery. It is not reserved for people who are born into money or who have special connections. Wealth is the natural result of making wise decisions consistently over time. It is the result of investing in your own development. It is the result of participating in community systems that create mutual benefit. It is the result of discipline and delayed gratification. It is the result of diversification and risk management, and it is the result of understanding that your wealth is not just for you, but for your family and your community. The families that have built and maintained wealth across generations have done so not because they are smarter or more talented than anyone else. They have done so because they have followed these principles consistently. And you can do the same. Shalom.